My name is Lulanga Sydney. I'm a tutor for human resource management. In human resource management, we'll be looking at the workforce in the workplace. What we are looking at is from the point of entry to the point of exit. How do you hire people? How do you manage people? And how do you ensure that they exit in a proper and humane manner? But before we proceed with human resources management, we have to look at the learning outcomes, the competencies that you are supposed to attain at the end of this presentation or at the end of this course. So there are a number of competencies that you are supposed to attain at the end of this course. The first one is that at the end of this course, you should be able to practice the operation of human resources management. You should be able to apply development management skills, which focuses on human assets or aspects of management. And you should be able to demonstrate the development of interpersonal understanding of relations. Interpersonal understanding and the relations in the workplace, how moving from the individual to group to organization, and how the organization relates with the rest of the community and the rest of society. But before we go further into human resource management, let's look at some of the key words. Since this is an introductory course, we need to understand certain concepts, certain words, as we get introduced to human resources management. So the first word that we should look at is management itself. Now, when you talk about management, we mostly refer ourselves to Henry Fayol, who talks about functions of management. And he says that there are 5 basic functions of management, which is planning, organizing, staffing, leading, and controlling. Management also, when it comes to Henry Fayol, he talks about 14 principles of management. We will not go into details about that. Then we also look at the concept of human resource management itself. What is it all about? This talks about the policies and practices one needs to carry out to ensure that we manage people. We ensure that human resources aspects of a management position, including from the point of entry, recruiting, screening, training, rewarding, and appraising. So human resource management looks at those areas: recruitment process, training and development process, managing people, how do you reward people, how do you appraise people. So those, it's one of the key words that we need to look at. Another key word is authority. When we talk about authority, we'll be talking about authority. What will we mean, or what should we understand by that? Authority mostly talks about people in a position to make decisions, to direct other people's work, and to give orders. Line managers, those are immediate supervisors. People who are authorized to direct the work of subordinates, and they are responsible for accomplishing the organization's goals. And when we are talking about staff managers, we talk about managers, supervisors who assist and advise their line managers. The other keyword is line authority. Here we are talking about personnel manager who directs the activities of people in his or her own department and in certain service areas, for example, in the cafeteria. Implied authority, this is authority exerted by a personnel manager by virtue of other people's knowledge that he or she has access to top management in areas, for example, in affirmative action decisions. Another keyword is functional control. Here we are talking about the authority exerted by an HR manager as coordinator of personnel activities. Then another word is employee advocacy. advocacy. Here we are talking about HR taking up responsibility to clearly define how management should be treating employees, making sure that employees have the mechanisms required to contest unfair practices, and also to represent the interests of employees within the framework of their personal obligation to senior management. Another key word is globalization, which is which has been the talk or the topic of late. Globalization, here we are talking when we look at organizations, in reference to organization, we are talking about the tendency of firms or organizations, businesses, to extend their sales or their line of business to new markets abroad. Now, competitive advantage is the core competence of the organization, is what makes the organization different from the other organization, what makes this organization to tick. So any factors that allow an organization to differentiate its products, service from those of its competitors in order to increase market share. That's what you call competitive advantage. Now, cost leadership, here it's where the organization or an enterprise or an entity aims to become the low-cost leader in an industry. Differentiation is when a firm seeks to be unique in its industry along dimensions that are widely valued by buyers. Now, what we are done with the keywords or the key concepts. Those key concepts, those keywords, you need to master them, you need to understand them, you need to know them in order to understand HRM, which is human resource management. So when we refer to HRM, we are talking about human resource management. Now, this time let's look at the strategic laws of human resource management. Now, there are a number of factors that we are going to look at in our presentation. Okay. Now, in this presentation, we are going to look at three major areas. We are going to look at what do we understand by human resource management, what are the functions and divisions of human resource management, and what are the changes or the evolution that has taken place of human resource management. Now, what is human resource management? In the previous presentation, we looked at what human resource management is, but let's look at it in detail. Human resource management aims at making or ensuring that the most productive use of human resource is brought to the fore. Human resource management is to make the most productive use of human resources to the greatest benefits of the organization and to the individual. So human resource management looks at the organization and also looks at the individual worker. It looks at mutuality. It says both of them should benefit. So when human resource management looks at the organization, it looks at two components. It looks at the organization itself, it looks at the individual employees, group of employees, how they contribute, what do they benefit from their contribution. So it looks at mutual relationship between employees and the organization. And then it also looks at profits and social commitments from both angles. It says that the organization should make certain concessions, the organization should make profit, but it should also make social commitments to its workers and to the immediate community and to society at large. And then when it looks at individuals, it says that individuals need to be trained and developed in order to be given the right skills, the right tools, in order for them to achieve or to realize their organizational goals. So what's the importance of HRM? HRM says that people are the key factors of the organization. They are the key assets. And it says that productivity is the key to measure the nation's economic growth potential, and the labor quality is key to improving productivity. So HRM says that competition today is the competition for talents. It's a competition for talent. What makes one organization different from the other organization? What makes this product different from the other product is what makes organizations to tick. So talent, core competencies, competitive advantage is what production is all about in today's business world. Survival. So what would make one organization survive over the other is talent. And since a person is the most uncontrollable and unpredictable variable of all production variables, organizational success depends on the management of these people. So HRM says that people are very unpredictable, they are very uncontrollable, but an organization needs to put into effect ways on how to manage these people. And then we look at organization and individual. Here, what are we talking about? We are saying there are some organizational needs. An organization needs to make profit. It needs to ensure that it continues producing. And productivity here we are referring to quality products. And also it needs to maintain the market share and even enlarge the market share. Now when it comes to individual, HRM says that individual needs need to be taken note of, and it refers itself to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Abraham Maslow talks about the 5 levels. It talks about physiological needs, social needs, safety needs, self-actualization, and self-esteem. So all those need to be taken note of. And then HRM also looks at issues when it comes to Maslow. It says that there are certain things that an individual cannot do without, and the organization needs to take note of, especially when it comes to physiological needs: security, belonging, self-respect, and self-actualization. Okay. Now, HRM also on organization and the individual, it says that there's need to coordinate the organization and they need to coordinate individual workers to ensure that the goals of HRM are realized, the objectives of the organization are realized. So they can only be realized if there's some coordination, there's some understanding, there's some link between individual effort and organizational effort. So HRM insists on mutuality, mutual relationship. Now, people and productivity. Productivity is the measurement of economic growth potential. Now, productivity formula literally talks about 2 things. It talks about input and output. The output should justify the input. So if there's more input, there's less output, there's a loss. If there's more output and there's less input, there's gain. So input comes in different forms. It looks at all kinds of resources that the organization has put into effect, and then the organization expects to reap from the input that it has put in. So if an organization invests into people, the people should be able to reproduce, and we'll look at what Frederick Taylor says about that later on. So the measurement of productivity is done in mainly 3 ways. The first one is the productivity of the worker is the output per hour. So what a worker is able to produce within an hour, we can say whether this employee is producing or not, or is being productive or not, but we also look at the quality of the product that this employee puts out there. Then the productivity of the equipment is the output per every dollar invested into that equipment. And then productivity of energy is the output per every unit of energy consumed. Okay. Now, employee quality and productivity. Employee's skill determines productivity. Here we are talking about the person himself or herself and the tools that are provided. We are also looking at the employee motivation. Employee motivation will be looking at health studies, will be looking at Elton Mayo, what Elton Mayo says about that. And he says that employee motivation affects productivity. So if someone is willing to perform, the person will be very productive. And if the person is unwilling to perform, the productivity will go down. And then we are also looking at the employee creativity, initiative. If you allow people to bring about their best in their work, initiatives, creativity, etc., you find that productivity will also go up. So innovation is the key to improvement. Okay. Now, functions and divisions of HRM. There are a number of functions and a number of divisions of HRM. The first one that we will look at is the management process. We talked about Henry Fayol, who talks about 5 functions of management, talks about planning, organizing, staffing, leading, and controlling. Now, there's also what we call job analysis. HRM conducts job analysis, and in job analysis it looks at 2 major areas. It looks at job description and job specification. And then HRM also looks at planning the future needs and supplies, ensures that looks at the personnel that is there and where the organization is moving to, whether it needs this type of personnel, and if it does not, what do we do with the current personnel, and in case there's any changes in the personnel, then what needs to be done. Okay. And then recruiting and selecting employees. What type of employees does the organization need? Where do we get this type of employees? What about the employees that the organization already has? Can they be improved upon through training and development? And then inducting employees, orienting employees, training and developing employees, and then also compensation. Here we are talking about wages, we are talking about salaries, we are talking about benefits, and also how to appraise the performance of the employees. It's also a function of HLM. And then communication. Now, communication is key in the organization. It brings about discipline, it brings about service delivery, it brings out the best in people. And then building employee commitment, incentives, allowing employees, for example, to buy stake in the organization. The longer the employee stays, the more shares the employee can have, and that brings commitment, that brings ownership, that brings identification of the employee with the organization. Now, let's look at the line managers' HRM responsibilities. Line managers are supervisors. They ensure that people are placed according to the way they are supposed to be placed. And then line managers also ensure that people are oriented, they're inducted, those who have just come in. And then they also provide on-the-job training of employees. They also help in the interpretation of the company policies and procedures. They conduct job appraisals. Line managers also control labor costs. They also protect labor, and they bring about discipline in the workplace. What about staff managers? Okay, staff managers, they advise the line managers. So staff managers, they direct and manage people in the HRM department. They coordinate certain functions. They coordinate HRM activities across the organization. Staff functions, one of the staff functions that staff managers are involved in is to ensure that HRM functions plus labor relations and collective bargaining with the trade union is effective. There's a win-win situation. They create a conducive environment for the employees to perform. Now, let's look at some of the developments or how HRM has been changing face over a period of time, what we call evolution of HRM. HRM, we start with the Industrial Revolution. We have left out the Agrarian Revolution, which comes before the Industrial Revolution, because HRM that time, it's a farming background. There wasn't much HRM that we can refer to. But when it comes to the Industrial Revolution, which comes about specialization and division of labor, remember Adam Smith, who talks about specialization and division of labor. Okay? And specialization and division of labor talks about the skilling of employees, helping employees to become so good at one area or in one area where you create teams. One employee does one thing and then pushes the product to the next person, and the other person adds value to that product, and the product goes round. And we see Adam Smith propagating specialization and division of labor, and we see people like Henry Ford actualizing what Adam Smith is talking about. And then we have another person, Robert Owens, who is considered the pioneer of human resource management. He talks about performance appraisal, that employees should be appraised, employees should know where they are going right and where the areas they need to grow. And then he says that people should be paid according to how they perform. And this, he says, it's fair treatment of employees. So if you perform well, you should be compensated accordingly. If you don't perform well, you should also be compensated accordingly. Okay? The second one talks about the scientific management. Here we are talking about Frederick Taylor, who is considered the father of scientific management. Now, scientific management, what it is all about is how we could define scientific management is that it's the systematic analysis and breakdown of work into the smallest mechanical components and rearranging them into the most efficient combination. Frederick Taylor has certain steps that he says for organizations to be effective, they need to follow that. He talks about job analysis, selection, training, and rewards. And then he also says that employees should be given all the tools that they need. They should be trained, they should be developed, they should be empowered, but they also should also realize what is expected of them and make decisions within their area or a line of duty. And Frederick Taylor says that if a person is not productive, he should be replaced without a blink of an eye. The third area that we look at in the evolution of human resource management is industrial psychology. In industrial psychology, we look at Henry Fayol. Remember, Henry Fayol talks about management functions. He also talks about principles of management. And then we also talk about F and L Gilbreth, principles of work simplification, who talk about time and motion studies. And then we come to Henry Gantt, principles of work scheduling. Now, Gantt is big in this because Gantt says that you should plan of work is already step one towards success. So we should plan our work, and we should be able to tell that if one plans his work very well, then the margins of failure or error are reduced. And then there's also the continuation of scientific management. We see a number of people looking into that area. Okay. Now, the fourth one that we look at is human behavior and relations. Now, human behavior and relations here, the people that we look at mostly is Elton Mayo, who propagated the Hawthorne studies, and was doing it through what you call Westinghouse. And the conclusion of the Hawthorne studies is that the happy workers are the most productive workers. And this we see in what you call the pet milk theory. There's also, under human behavior and relations, we see Max Weber, who talks about bureaucracy. And bureaucracy, there are a number of factors that we see in bureaucracy. Bureaucracy literally talks about the chain of command, the authority. And apart from Max Weber, who talks about bureaucracy, we also see Chris Algiers, who talks about the individual and organization, and he says that there should be mutual adjustment on both sides. And all these theories, we find that human resource management is affected by them, and we find human resources management adjusting to these theories, and it has defined what human resources management is today. So there are also the fifth one that we look at the 3 stages of growth of human resource management. The first one is the FAO management, where it started from the 1900s and up to the 1960s, where the emphasis was made on collecting and storing data on each employee. And then from 1964 to 1980, governments came up with different regulations on ensuring that the employees are treated well. Remember, the 1960s, that's where you find a lot of civil rights movements, rights of workers. So the governments came up with all kinds of regulations to protect the workers. And in the US, you find people like Dorothy Day, Martin Luther King, and the rest, Martin Luther King Jr., propagating these things. So in conclusion, what did we see in this presentation? We have seen that human resource management looks at human resources as the asset of the organization, as the key asset, that an organization cannot exist without human resources. And we have also seen that there's an emphasis on joint responsibilities of line managers, staff managers, employees themselves, organizations, and individual employees complementing each other.